Hi Root for Nature family and welcome to 2025. I hope you all had a good break and you're feeling recharged and you're ready for the year ahead. I Root for Nature is now officially back for 2025 and we are kicking off the season with an episode in our Environmental Law 101 series. For those of you who are new here, first of all, welcome to the fam. And Environmental Law 101 is basically where we learn about the law in just 10 minutes. Imagine that. If you've been here for a while, you know that we've been going through a climate change is not my problem series where we've been discussing all things climate change, right? What it is, what causes it, and why we should care about it. So if you haven't watched those episodes, please be sure to go and watch them because we are now building on top of those episodes and now actually diving into the law. So in Environmental Law 101, we are going to be discussing the South African Climate Change Legislative Framework because law is one of the tools that we can use to effect change and advance climate justice in our society. But before we do all of that, just some housekeeping. Just a reminder that we now have a website for Root for Nature where you can find resources on sustainability and the law. And this year I'll also be sharing some blog posts on topical issues in relation to sustainability. So I'll let you know on the posting schedules for those things, but be on the lookout for it. On the website, which I will put a link to in the description box, tatinampondo.com, you're also going to find a link to a podcast that I've been working on, which is called the Dear Nana Love Not to My Daughter podcast. It's kind of like a different twist to the work that we currently do here. But Dear Nana is basically a community for young people to share wisdom and go through life together. So if you are looking for content on how to navigate some of life's hardest challenges and live a truly purposeful and authentic life, please head over to Dear Nana podcast and I'm sure you'll find something for you there. And on that note, both Root for Nature and Dear Nana are available on Instagram and TikTok, so you can also head over there and follow us for more content so that we're always connected. All right, now that we're done with some housekeeping, let's dive right into the video of the day. So from the Climate Change is Not My Problem series, we know that climate change is a critical issue because it disrupts natural ecosystems, economies, and human societies, primarily due to the excessive greenhouse gas emissions from human activities such as the burning of fossil fuels, deforestation, and industrial processes. Vulnerable communities, particularly those in developing nations, they suffer disproportionately despite contributing the least to global emissions. And addressing climate change actually requires urgent action, including transitioning to renewable energy, improving energy efficiency, protecting natural carbon sinks like forests and oceans, implementing strong climate policies, and promoting sustainable consumer habits, which is what we strive to do here at Root for Nature. So one of the essential tools that we need to combat climate change is robust laws and policies that will regulate and effectively implement our emission reduction targets and help us build a more climate resilient and just society. So South Africa is one of the countries in the world that now has a climate change specific legislative framework, and in this video I'm just going to be breaking it down for you and sharing some key things that you need to know about our climate law. So first things first, South Africa had what is known as a National Climate Change Response White Paper, which was published in 2011. And essentially what this policy document did was to guide the nation's climate policy and set the foundation to the country's approach to climate change mitigation and adaptation. But as you all know, policy, although it is a step in the right direction, it is not a legally binding document. It's not as strong in terms of actually enforcing it. So what was then needed is some kind of law. So in 2015, South Africa also became a signatory to the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement is a legally binding global treaty on climate change, which aims to limit global warming to well below 1.5 degrees Celsius to pre-industrial levels. So Under the Paris Agreement, there is a mechanism that is known as the nationally determined contributions, and each country is required to have an NDC stipulating their commitment and targets in relation to greenhouse gas emissions reductions and the key priority areas that they will be focusing on for climate mitigation and adaptation. So there's going to be another video delving deep into the law on nationally determined contributions, that is their nature, their legal character, and how they will actually work. So I'll not be going deep on it in this particular video, but be on the lookout of that video in the next coming weeks. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel so that you do not miss out on all of this information. So for now, I'm just going to briefly touch on South Africa's current nationally determined contribution and what you can expect to find in there as it informs the nation's climate change legal framework and response. So yeah, just briefly, NDCs are supposed to be submitted every 5 years and updated and strengthened as you go. And South Africa, as a signatory to the Paris Agreement, has committed to also play its part in the global climate response while ensuring a just transition to a low carbon economy. So because NDCs are legally binding instruments under international law and every country that is a signatory to the Paris Agreement is required to have them, South Africa also has its own NDC. So South Africa's current NDC was last updated in 2021, and just FYI, we are actually due for an update for our NDC, and the Presidential Climate Change Commission is actually going to be undertaking a consultation process with the public on the new NDC targets that South Africa is aiming to reach in 2035 in relation to climate change mitigation and reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. So be on the lookout on that consultation process, and please do participate in it, because that is one way in which you can actually get involved in climate policy making and also in advocating for your rights and making sure that at the end of the day we actually have a more climate resilient legislative framework that will foster a just transition for all of us. But basically, South Africa's current NDC outlines the country's commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and adapting to climate change impacts. The NDC sets an emissions target range of 350 to 420 metric tons by 2030, which represents a significant reduction from business as usual scenarios. So this particular commitment includes a transition to renewable energy sources and reduced reliance on coal. As we all know, South Africa is heavily dependent on coal resources. So that's one of the priority key sectors that the NDC wishes to address and reduce our coal reliance. And then there's going to be an implementation of energy efficiency measures across all economic sectors, the development of green transportation systems such as electric vehicles and public transport systems that are green, and enhancement of carbon sinks through nature-based solutions, including strengthening adaptation measures in vulnerable sectors. So these are some of the key things that you're going to find in South Africa's NDC, the current NDC. Of course, if you're looking at it like that, there are certain things that are missing from this NDC, right? So as we are going into a new consultation process of an updated NDC that needs to be submitted under the Paris Agreement, this is an opportunity for you to also identify some key priority areas and sectors that you think need to be included in the NDC as part of our climate mitigation and adaptation targets in South Africa. So the NDC also emphasizes the importance of a just transition, ensuring that the shift to a low carbon economy doesn't disproportionately affect vulnerable communities and workers in carbon intensive industries, right? And another important thing to note here on the NDC is that South Africa's commitment is conditional on receiving international financial support, technology transfer, and capacity building assistance to fully implement these measures, right? So this is something that is also found in the wording of the Paris Agreement, which we're going to be getting into in the next coming weeks. So be on the lookout for that. But with regards to this NDC, whether or not it is sufficient or robust enough is a bone of contention that we'll not get into in this video. But I would just say that these are some of the things we need to start thinking about right now as we're going into a new updated NDC framework, and also as we're thinking about what a climate resilient future that will lead to a just transition in South Africa looks like. So now that we have the National Climate Change Response Policy, and then we are signatory to the Paris Agreement, in terms of the law, if you become a party to an international treaty, you also have to domesticate it into your national laws in some way. And one of the ways that you can do that is to implement legislation that facilitates the implementation of that treaty in your nation, right? So South Africa, as part of its Paris Agreement commitments, and also to find ways to implement its NDC targets, it then established a comprehensive legislative framework to address climate change, which culminated in the enactment of the Climate Change Act of 2023. This act was actually promulgated last year in 2024. So this act basically provides a structured approach to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions and to adapt to climate impacts in South Africa. So just to touch briefly on some of the key components of the Climate Change Act. Number one, this is the National Climate Change Response document. So the act basically outlines South Africa's strategy for both mitigation and adaptation, aiming for a just transition to a low carbon and climate resilient economy. This is in line with the initial climate change response policy of 2011. So you can see how that policy has now been turned into a law, and also our Paris commitments are also being legislated in some way. And then another key component of the Climate Change Act is what is known as sectoral emission targets. So the act mandates the establishment of emission reduction targets for key sectors such as energy, transportation, and agriculture. And the relevant ministers of those sectors are responsible for implementing policies to achieve these targets. And then another key component of the Climate Change Act is what is known as carbon budgets. So what carbon budgets are essentially is where large greenhouse gas emitters are allocated specific carbon budgets, right? Setting limits on their emissions over defined periods. So the budget is basically what you can emit in any given year, and then if you go beyond that, you are then taxed or fined. It actually works sort of hand in hand with the carbon tax system, because when you exceed your carbon budgets, it results in financial penalties, which includes things like higher carbon tax rates being charged against whoever that person is, right? And then another key component to the Climate Change Act is provincial and municipal adaptation plans. This is so great because now the local government is involved in climate change mitigation and adaptation, which is something that wasn't really there or not as explicit in our law. So the Act now requires all provinces and municipalities to actually assess climate risks and develop adaptation strategies to enhance resilience at a local level. And I think that's such an important thing because each community is different, it faces different climate risks. So if local government is actually assessing what the adaptation strategies are and how to mitigate climate impacts in that specific municipality, then I think it would actually create better climate resilience, particularly in those communities. We'll be specifically unpacking each of these components on social media, so giving you more insight on what it is and what it seeks to achieve in the coming days. So right now we just touched briefly on what carbon budgets are, but for example, we're actually going to be on social media, I Root for Nature page, just like going deep into what are carbon budgets, what are sectoral emission targets. So please go follow us on I Root for Nature on TikTok and Instagram so that you don't miss out on this information. So yeah, basically the Climate Change Act represents a significant advancement in South Africa's environmental policy, providing a robust legal framework to address the challenges of climate change and to facilitate a transition towards sustainable development in South Africa. But although we now have a Climate Change Act, it is not yet operational, and therefore we cannot exactly start enforcing its provisions. So the president just signed it into law, but it's not operational at the moment. However, given the urgency of the climate crisis, it is imperative for government to urgently start to make efforts to operationalize this act and ensure that all sectors of government take steps to mitigate and adapt to climate change. So that is something that we also need to be advocating for and putting pressure on government for in this year, to make sure that the act is not just there, but it's actually enforced and implemented and it starts working. So to the best part, what can you do as an individual to get involved in this process and to also use the law to enforce your rights and also fight for climate justice? Number one, you can start by familiarizing yourself with the Climate Change Act and what it seeks to achieve. Tell others about it and don't keep it to yourself. The good thing about all our laws is they are available online. You just need to search for Climate Change Act and it's publicly available, so you're gonna get it. And then the second thing that you can do is to join in the efforts to advocate and push for government to operationalize the act and strengthen the regulations for climate change mitigation and adaptation. So whichever circle of influence that you are in, you can advocate for change in that space, and together we can make a difference. You don't necessarily have to be part of an NGO or to be in a higher influential position to do this. Wherever you are, whether it's on your TikTok, on your Instagram, at your school, wherever you are, you can actually get involved and start to advocate for the operationalization of this act. But also you can actually participate in the NDC consultation processes and make your voices be heard in that process, because that is a nice way to contribute to the policy making of our law and refining our law, right? So that's another way that you can participate. Always be on the lookout on what is going on in this space and how you can get involved, because together we can make a difference. You can't wait for somebody else to do it when you can also do something. So the third thing that you can then do is to participate in public engagement processes on climate change and just transition and make your voice heard, such as the NDC process that I mentioned is coming in March. So you can be part of that process. I'm going to leave details of that in the description box. I know one of the dates is the 3rd of March 2025 or something, but I will leave the details in the description box. Do not miss out that consultation process. That is one essential way to get involved in climate policy development and in also advancing your rights and ensuring that we create a sustainable and climate resilient future. Essentially what I'm trying to say is we all have a role to play in the fight against climate change, and we cannot just sit and wait for other people to do it for us. As the famous quote says, you are either a part of the problem or you are the solution. So which one are you gonna be? Alright y'all, we have reached the end of this video and I hope you enjoyed it, and please do comment down below on what action are you going to take to get involved in climate action in 2025. Also leave any questions that you may have in the comment section down below and I'll be happy to answer them. If you enjoyed this video and would like to know more on sustainability and the law, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and also share this video with others. It also helps to push the video to other people who may find it helpful and grow the channel as well. So thank you all for your support, and until the next time, stay true, keep fighting, and keep the earth clean.